This is Open Office Hours webinar, and our topic today is creating a science poster. And if you didn't hear it earlier, you can use the chat window if you have questions, or raise your hand in the participant list to have any questions along the way. We'll make sure that we get everything answered, before we end today. So don't hesitate to ask for clarification or examples on anything you hear today. So I am Tracy Ostrom, and I will be talking to you today on this webinar. And this webinar is in the spirit of student research symposia that are going to take place around the country. This is a list of our locations this year. We have divided up the region, the U.S. into 6 regions, and you can see there where the different locations are. If you haven't heard about the different opportunities for attending, we've got lots of great information on the website for you to take a look at, and I'll give you that website in a little bit. I am working on the Pacific Regional Science Symposium, which will be at NASA Ames. So we're looking forward to lots of fun projects here out in California. So this webinar is being recorded. You can also access other webinars that we've had this year through our office hours, anywhere from asking a research question, the right question, analyzing data, drawing conclusions. Those are all available on the SRS website, on the Globe website, along with some teacher resources, and we'll talk a little bit about some of those in a few minutes. And after this little office hour time, there's another one coming up in March, and it's taking us through from preparing a poster presentation to actually presenting your poster at an SRS. So I invite all of you to follow through and share this even with your students. If you can't make it, take a look at the recording and share it with your students. All right. So Teacher Hotline is available. I don't know if you guys can see the Google form link, which you can get on the SRS website. But we do have a list of experienced Globe teachers that have volunteered to help out new Globe teachers who are preparing their students for the SRS. And there is actually a list of those teachers and what their grade levels are that you can access on the SRS. And if you need some help, need to collaborate with another teacher in terms of asking questions, getting tips, this is a great opportunity to move forward with that by connecting with another Globe teacher who's been a part of the SRS program. I am muted now. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, so I talked about this SRS webpage on the Globe website. This is the URL for that, and we'll put that in the chat box, or maybe Jen can put that in the chat box for you so you can have a direct access to that. And don't forget to use the chat window or raise your hand for questions. So we're gonna talk a little bit about science posters and kind of putting it all together. Your students have been identifying a research question, they've been designing their data collection, they've actually been collecting data and analyzing data and hopefully drawing some conclusions. But the real question is, how do we put that in a story format so that the students can tell what their experiences were all about? And so that's where the science poster comes in. So again, I'm Tracy Ostrom, and I am a Globe partner out here in California. I'm with UC Berkeley, and I am specifically a part of the Globe Mission Earth program, which is a collaboration between several universities, including University of Toledo, Boston University, Tennessee State, and West Ed. and NASA. So I'm happy to be here talking to you guys. So thanks for inviting me, and let's get started. I want to talk a little bit about the formatting of a science poster and give you some tips there. And then I want to talk about the science poster, as I said earlier, as a way to present your story as a student group. We want them to be good examples of stories. And I'm going to show you a few examples of posters and talk to you a little bit about the poster template that's actually on the Globe website that you can access. So this is the poster template. It's a PowerPoint poster. And so you can see it's got lots of titles and different components of it. And I want to go through that just a little bit with you. And some of the notes here are based on some of the previous submittals that we've seen. Starting out with the title, 15 words or less. We've had some very long titles of our SRS posters and IVSS posters. Keeping a title to 15 words or less that summarize what the study is all about is always best practice. A lot of students don't know what an abstract is. And so as teachers, we need to inform our students that an abstract is typically written at the end of your research and covers the basis of what your research is, what your question is, what you did, and what the results are. And that can all be done in about 200 words. So the guideline there is to keep your abstract to 200 words or less. And I'm going down through the left column of the poster that you see here. The research question in introduction, kind of wrap up that first column. And if you listen to Dave Bydlowski's presentation on drawing conclusions, one of the things he mentioned is this claimed evidence reasoning approach to research. And so I wanted to build that into this presentation as well, because the research question and the introduction is kind of like the claim of your poster presentation. Doing a second column here is probably going to be a little bit longer because it's all about the research methods, what the protocols were, when the protocols were, when the data was collected, how it was collected. And I want to mention Globe badges there at the bottom of the column. This is something that if your students are entering the IVSS or the Virtual Science Symposium, they're going to want to align their research to 2 different badges, which can be engineering, community involvement, working with a scientist, etc. And if on the SRS presentation they did this, then that should be highlighted under their research methods. The results, always a challenge for kids of how to present their results, but this is the evidence of the claim evidence and reasoning portion of the research. Figures, tables, graphs, I'll talk a little bit about that. Discussion of the results is a summary of those results and should lead the reader into the conclusions that are drawn, and that's the reasoning side of the CER. Certainly the bibliography is important, including, I will say, the scientists that the student group may have worked with throughout their research. So this is kind of like the anatomy of a research poster, a science research poster. And again, like I said, there, the template is on the Globe website. All right, so let's talk a little bit about formatting. So formatting fonts are, kids like to do shadows and outlines and, make it really fancy, maybe some script. And your advice to them is, no, don't do it that way. We really want posters to be easy to read by our reviewers during the Science Symposium. And so sans serif fonts seem to work best. And these fonts have what I call no wings to them. So no fancy endings to each letter. And it just is so much easier to follow when reading it in a poster format. Certainly avoid, like I said earlier, the shadows, the outlines, the fancy script. I would avoid red in a red background in the typing because it's really offensive to look at. But light on dark or dark on light type of color combinations seem to work. And most importantly, be consistent. It's not necessarily attractive for each column to have its own separate look. We want to make sure that the picture is consistent throughout the poster. And some recommended fonts for titles are 80 font. Your headings, like research methods and introduction, etc., is 40 to 60 font. And your text, 36 font is probably a good text size for the reviewers to read. And I said earlier, one of the challenging things for students is how to present their data. And so, as you know, graphs guide your audience into your conclusions. Students forget to label each axis in their graphs. Sometimes they forget to include a legend. Sometimes they forget to put a title on a table or a figure. So those are all seem like kind of a small point, but it really makes a difference in presenting the reviewer with the information that they're looking for, and that is your results. Really, which is again hard for kids, is that they need to look at their data and decide what's the best way to present this data. A line graph or a pie chart or a bar graph, they really need to decide what's going to make sense to their data. That's where I think we need to help out as educators to help them decide the best representation of the information that they're presenting. Tables are okay. Sometimes a busy table is hard to follow, and a reviewer will just glance over that in hopes of trying to see something else visual that will give them the information they're looking for. So if we do tables, we have to be careful on how they're presented. So I want to give you a couple examples here on graphs. Just take a moment. I know, we're not going to have an ability to dialogue, but both these graphs are examples of graphs that you see on SRS posters. And I can imagine when you're looking at this, which one you would be most comfortable in understanding the data. So as you can see the graph on the left, the legend is not given. There's no axis information of what we're even looking at. There's no title. And on the right-hand side, we see we know exactly what we're looking at. We know each axis is identified, the legend is identified, and the figure has a title to it. So what's making sense here? Again, these are examples that are out there where we have a table on the left, upper left, and a table on the lower right, and it's good to show these two contrasted tables and ask the kids, well, which one would you think you would understand better? Because I'm guessing that most of our kids will go for the table in the upper left, and there it's perfectly clear to them what the information is telling us, but not to someone who doesn't know their research. So giving examples like this, I think, are important for the kids to see. So the next thing I want to talk about is presenting the story. Having a poster that conveys a story of the student's work is super important. And I present this slide just to let you know how the story is told in a poster. As we move from left to right, we go down the poster, and then, like the columns that you saw in our template, we guide from the beginning of the research to the end of the research. And I think, again, this image to show kids on how to put a poster together and how to tell a story with the poster is pretty important. And so here's an example of a poster that I wanted to show you. And as you can see, there are definite columns, the title's clear, the font size is fine for what we're presenting. The graphs look like they've got the legends and the information on each graph. So this is an example of what we're looking for in students presenting their story. And there's on the left-hand side here, you can see that the research question and the hypothesis are separated here because, and that's fine to add or to highlight the hypothesis. And one thing you'll see if you've never been to a science symposium, student research symposium, you'll see that no two posters look alike, and that's okay. Often I get questions, oh, can we move this over there, or can we widen this column? And and that's fine. And here are some examples of just last year, our posters from the Pacific Student Research Symposium. And you can see that not all the posters are identical. I mean, they have a similar format. All of them have similar formats, but they kind of wanted to make it their own. They wanted to highlight their own research and background. So, and that's okay. It's certainly an individual thing, but as long as we have those components, and those components will match the rubric that the reviewers will be using to talk to the students about, and as long as it has those components, I think you're in good shape. So that's all I had. So what I want to do is open it up to the masses, i.e. you, and see what kind of questions you guys might have.
This is Kevin.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, of course we had the Olympics going on in the background here. But anyway, as far as so the regional student symposia, the students are supposed to make sure they have globe data, I think. Just want to make sure I clarify that or find out what are the rules on that? Do you know data that's entered, or how much globe data do they need?
Well, that's a really common question that I get from my teachers is how much data does my student need to collect? And then I ask them a question right back. Well, it depends on your research. What's the research question that the students are doing? There's no doubt about it that this, the student research symposium, the students have to have globe data. They have to be using globe data to make their presentation. Now, some students collect one set of data I've seen and then use the globe visualization tool to compare their set of data to many different locations. And that's okay too, to use their data and compare with other school sites. So how much depends on the research, what their question is, what they want to take a look at. And so I don't think there's we need 3 data points or we need 2 months worth of data kind of answer.
All right. Well, thanks, Tracy.
Uh-huh.
So Tracy, in the chat box is people would like a copy of your PowerPoint, if that's possible.
Yeah, I'm not sure how we do that. Do we post it, or I can send it out, or we can post it? How does that work, Jen?
So if you want to send it to me, I can post it on our resources page.
Perfect.
That's okay, and we'll do that as a PDF so that people can download that. And also, do you have a version of the poster template that's formatted to a large poster size?
Oh, great question. So when you fill out the PowerPoint template, you'll have to bring it to a print shop and they can actually print it out. Some will print it out right from the PowerPoint as a PowerPoint slide, but you tell the dimensions of what size you want. And I think the recommended dimension minimum is 2 feet height and 3 feet wide. You can go larger, but you need to talk to your local symposium, because they may have a limit on how the size board to post the poster on, or to attach the poster on. But the print shop can enlarge your template. Sometimes they'll convert it to a PDF file, and then they'll print it as PDF according to the dimensions you request.
All right, Larissa is here from Northeast. Hi, Tracy, and thank you for your great presentation. I love it. I love all the presentations. It's just so helpful. Just a quick question from a group of teachers who are joining SRS first time this year. I'm really excited. This is a new development in the area, sort of underserved area, as we all concentrate in Boston, and we love Boston, but some areas are really had less opportunities, so we're really working on bringing them all along. So a quick question from them. They all concerned if the questions that they will be, the investigative questions and the theme for their research would be somewhat repetitive without them knowing it. So in other words, like for example, here in Massachusetts, for Science Fair, Massachusetts Science Fair, we have a catalog of all student presentations and things of that nature. So they're afraid somebody else already done that. So, and I think for them, I would like to encourage them all to really, not to really think about, just really think outside of the box, so to speak. It's not about more like limitations rather than really getting involved. What's your take on that?
So that's a good question. And I think even when I work with high schools and there's 2 or 3 classes that a teacher is working with, so you're going to have repeat questions, research questions, or repetitive research areas where these 2 or 3 groups are all taking temperature readings and comparing it to some aspects of clouds, for example. And I think when we go from year to year, we do see, oh, here's an atmosphere research question again on blah, blah, blah. I think what makes them all unique is that they're very personalized. And I encourage students who, even they're taking the basic concepts of research, like I said, clouds and temperature, they can always personalize it based on where they live, right, in their own community, and making those community connections of why is this research important to where I'm at, what my community, my bubble, you could say. And I think when students do that, first of all, having that personalized desire or personalized interest goes a long ways when they talk to the reviewers about their research. But also then it makes their presentation, no matter how many temperature cloud projects that are out there, it makes their research very unique. And I encourage all of our teachers who are working with multiple sets of projects to really encourage the students to personalize why that research question is important to them.
Thank you. Thank you. I will pass that along, and I think it's a very important point to really them to remember. Absolutely. Thank you, Tracy.
My pleasure.
Tracy, I'll just add on to that I remember at one of the first in 2016, so the first set of these, there was one teacher and they were all working with a similar data set, every single one, and they were going to do, just 2 projects with 2 different questions. And even from that one data set, and it was phenology data,
Mhm.
The students came up with there were 7 students, came up with 7 individual questions, and they didn't want to work together anymore. Because, I mean, it was the same data, but yet they had different ideas about what to do with it. And I think that was just so interesting. And it really speaks to that when you said to personalize it, because, you know, they took ownership of it and like, well, I don't want to research that. I've got this other idea. So once they started looking at the data, those were their questions, and it was very personal.
Yeah, and I think that's what makes this globe so unique in lieu of some of the candid science fairs where that are really content based. I mean, giving student choice and empowering our students to make some decisions and step outside their comfort zone a little bit, and hopefully leading to a STEM career choice, or at least exploring STEM career choices by doing this type of research is super important. And it's going to bring out the interest of kids, and when you bring out those kids' interests, they have a tendency to follow those interests.
And I'm going to ask another question.
Mm-hmm.
In some areas of the country, they have been really getting away from the hypothesis part. And so that just brings up the question to me, as we have these templates out there for the posters. There are definitely some schools and some science classes where they're not spending as much time with that hypothesis.
Mm-hmm.
So do they have to have all those pieces that are on the poster if they're not doing them in class? So is it okay to cut out some of those sections that maybe a teacher does not cover in the classroom?
Well, that's a really interesting question, because the components of research include all those components that are on the science poster. So while, let's say, discussing the data is not on the poster, but they do have the results on there, if they don't include a discussion of their results, I think a part of the story is missing. And what I said earlier about getting the kids to think about the poster as telling their story, it's like leaving out a couple chapters in your story. And I think one thing that students use is they use the poster to guide their discussion with the scientists during the SRS. And I would hate for them to miss out and miss a component of that discussion because they didn't have that on their poster. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing, but I think it could be more challenging or more difficult for the student in the presentation part. It could be more challenging in the future when they, if they do continue on the research side, to not be able to know how to discuss their results. So since this research symposium, at least in our neck of the woods, is more of a discussion as opposed to a scoring process, I think if they don't have a certain component on their poster, then they better be able to talk about it, at least during their presentation time frame. That's my take on it.
And Mike did add that he thinks the move away from the hypothesis is more a move away from the linear path to the scientific method, and that all the pieces are important and should stay on the poster.
Agreed.
And if I'm allowed to ask one more question, I'm sorry if somebody hasn't had the chance to ask, please interrupt me, jump right in. But in the meantime, one more question that came from students actually. They ask, because we always include discussions, whatever research they conduct, about the STEM careers. So, and they say, can we put some information or references on the poster about if they do like XYZ research, how, from what angle they think, what kind of STEM professionals are doing this kind of research. So I personally didn't have a direct answer to that question, but I thought it's more like for discussion rather than for poster.
That's a good question. On the badges section, they do have an opportunity to put down the scientist or career connections. And so I would encourage them to do that, because I think it shows an in-depth understanding of why their research is important. So if that means that they've gained some understanding about a potential STEM career that they're interested in, I say that's a win-win.
Thank you, Tracy.
Mm-hmm. So there's a number of examples of posters that are on the Globe website that you can show your students as examples of what scientific research posters look like, which I think would probably be good for students to see how other students tell their story. So I would definitely encourage you guys to use the resources on the SRS website to help your students.
Excellent. Thank you, Tracy.
Mm-hmm. So anything else, Jen? Jen just posted the URL in the chat box.
Yes, I put the one for the rubrics there because I think that's an important piece to keep in mind when you're creating that poster. Mm-hmm. And the rubrics that we have it's interesting, right? Because the rubrics that we have are designed for the presentation. And the presentation, like Tracy, you had mentioned, comes from, using that poster to present to the reviewers. So the rubrics, although they're really focused more on that oral presentation versus what's on that poster. And then what also might be helpful is the IVSS, so the International Virtual Science Symposia rubric. That also might be helpful in helping your students to figure out what goes on the poster. But that is also used to grade the full report. So just in terms of developing these products with students, you might want to keep in mind both of the sets of rubrics for assistance. Would you agree with that, Tracy?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think looking at the peer review form and the reviewers evaluation form, both those forms are on the SRS webpage. I think it's super important for the kids to know what kind of questions or what the reviewers will be looking at during the SRS, and to make sure that those points are on their poster.